Welcome to Turning Soul. This is episode 1. I'm Dane. On this episode and the next 4 or 5, I talked my good buddy Walt into reading this book with me. It's called How Christianity Saves Civilization and Must Do So Again. We go over almost every single chapter in there. Talk a lot about the Roman Empire and how it connects with our country today, and then how Christians save civilization back in the Roman Empire. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so I'm sitting here with Walt. You were on the How I Embrace the Suck podcast and washed out.
I do.
How are those going?
I'm spending this week recording episodes for How I Embrace the Suck. I just did one this morning. I've got another on Thursday and 2 on Friday. So, and hopefully more. Just haven't heard back from people, but it can be rough chasing folks down. There has been a little bit of a drought just because I'm running out of guests, or maybe I'm not good at marketing, or both, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. It can be hard connecting with people and trying to find them. But how long have you been doing that now?
Dude, I was just thinking about that. The first episode I released over 2 years ago.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I was on it a long time ago.
Yeah,
But
I know that it's nothing for podcasters, but for me, I'm like, holy cow, 2 years. I think it's close to 45, maybe 45 episodes. So it might be more, but yeah, because I was doing it every week, and then I did it every other week, and then I've had lots of gaps where I just can't find somebody. I don't want to just throw something out. I thought about me just talking,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like that's not what the show is. It's not at all. I need to keep it. I try to divorce myself. This is only divorce I'm in favor of. I try to divorce myself from the show and use the show to present the guest and not to present me. So, anyways, yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the episode that I was on, or what it was called. Not that we have to try to figure that out, but
dude, you got me.
I didn't expect you. I didn't expect you to remember. That wasn't me trying to get you. But
well, without trying, you did so.
But anyways, I asked you to buy this book and read it with me. How Christianity Saves Civilization and Must Do So Again. And
wait, what? Which book?
Yeah, I know. Are you reading the wrong book? That would have been awesome, though.
That would have been.
It would have been. And
it would have been.
Dude, when I started reading it, I texted you. I was like, "We're in trouble, man. I'm on page 11, and I could do an hour on one sentence in the book." And then I thought about, do I ask him to do like an episode per chapter? But then that would just be asking too much time from you. There's only 10.
It's only 10 chapters.
Right, but that could be 10 hours. You know what I mean? If that, or more even, because I don't know about you, but when I'm reading it, it's just like, I just want to highlight every single sentence. And then it's like, what if I do that? What am I going to do? Just read the entire book and then.
Right.
But
yeah, I started out with a little underlining, and then I started more underlining and double and triple. And now I got notes in the margins. And I think I'm in chapter 3. So I've got a ways to go.
No, that's fine.
No, but I mean, I'm like, the notes I'm taking are getting more and more copious as I go along.
I know, dude. So that chapter, I only read the first 4 chapters so far, and not that the 4th chapter was bad, but it just wasn't as much of me thinking and wanting to take notes and learn about stuff. Because I'm taking notes on like the footnotes to try to figure out who to read.
Okay.
Like I've always believed in God, but besides that, it wasn't really anything for me, I guess, until maybe, I guess, last year, really. So now I'm trying to learn more, and I'm so new to it, I don't even know who to learn from.
Oh yeah, I got you.
Dude, I bought a random book on the internet, and it turns out it's like some, I don't know, gay pastor who's just promoting all that stuff. And I
Score.
I sent a picture of it to my pastor, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's notorious for all that." And so I just sent it back because it was just uh, promoting like the trans LGBT
Oh,
stuff, and
oh, yeah, dude. Okay, yeah. It makes me really uncomfortable to see people. I guess it shouldn't, because so often people use the Bible to justify all kinds of things. But when
mm-hmm,
people use it for something that's at the cutting edge of the um adjustment of culture, I guess it's that much more in your face. Maybe that's what it is. I
mm-hmm,
should be as saddened by other stuff, people using the Bible to justify other sins.
war. That happens a
Well, that
lot.
one does particularly sadden me just because of the time of the moment, but
Oh, that too, yeah,
and where I came from for sure. But
yeah.
yeah, it's easier to criticize what you know. People that
Mm-hmm.
came from the left are really good at criticizing or critiquing the left, and then people that came from the right tend to be better at critiquing the right.
Mm-hmm. I
But
agree. So my
that
pet.
rabbit went down the hole. Sorry.
So no, so my pastor actually suggested this book, and I
Mm,
was, because I finally asked him, I was like, dude, how do you know so much about the Roman Empire? And he was
sure.
like, read this book. And I was like, okay. And then I thought it'd be fun to go through. Um, I don't even know how to do this. Like I said, there's so much knowledge and so many good sentences in there. I don't even know where to
Sure.
start. But I guess it starts with a really good story about, I don't know if I want to dig through and find all these names. Actually, so I'm against taking notes inside my books because then I just feel like it ruins them.
Okay.
So I
All
just
right.
do it on paper. But the Bishop Polycarp
Mm,
at the
yeah.
very
Yeah.
beginning is talking about how he's in the gladiator games, not in them, but in the arena, and they're trying to get him to disavow God. And he's like,
Right.
I'm not going to do that. And he's like, well, we'll feed you to the animals. And he's like, okay, go ahead. And then he's like, well, we'll set you on fire. And he's like, that's fine, basically, you know. So they set him on fire, but he doesn't burn at all. He's untouched by the flames. So then they just stab him either in the neck or in the heart,
Mm,
one of the two. And there's so much blood it puts out all the flames. And then they
hmm.
start the fire again, and it actually burns him after he's dead. But I just thought that was really interesting because throughout this book, it's just example after example of how Christians were willing to give everything up. They were willing
Right.
to be tortured and killed. And not that they were happy about it, but that's just who they were. And now looking at Christians, I don't think we're the same. You know,
Yeah.
it'd be really hard for me to be like, okay, set me on fire, that's fine. You know,
Right.
I'd like to
Right.
say, yeah, I'd be willing to do that, but at the same time, that's a lot of pain. It's scary. It'd also be really scary, but um, yeah, I don't
Well, and
know.
it's a lot easier. I shouldn't say easier. The choice is a lot more plain and evident when it's so to such extremes. When if you're confronted with deny Christ or we light the fire, there's not a lot of nuance.
Hmm.
But if you're told, um, um, I don't know, um, I can't come up with an example, but do something minor, or your friend group will turn you down,
Or
right?
like
That
close your church down because we said so.
sure, and because of how that proposition was couched, I think a lot of people found it easier to dismiss it. But on the face of it, it should have been a very clear, no nuance question. if somebody tells the church to close their doors, that should be a very obvious position or a very obvious demand. But because of the way they phrased it and everything, people are like, oh no, well, it kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
That we're more willing, and it could be because we're softer now. We're more willing to yield to persecution, I guess, in a sense. I guess if you don't experience it, it's not persecution. So maybe it wasn't.
Maybe the fear of.
Yeah, sure. The threat of. Yeah, for sure. I said in early 2020, I was like, I don't want to hear any churches talk about the persecuted church in other countries because they just sagged. They just gave up entirely. So don't tell me about the plight of Christians in China or something because you basically abandoned them through your own actions.
Yeah. And basically everybody did it. I remember seeing a pastor in Canada getting like drug out and thrown in the cop car and arrested for not shutting his doors. But really, it's like, well, if we're here for anything, why wouldn't it be to stay open when everybody's scared,
Right.
And then looking at all the issues. And this isn't a podcast about the time. It's just very relevant to what we're talking about, I guess. But
Sure.
I also just read Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. And have you read that book?
I've heard the name John Taylor Gatto, and that's it.
Okay. It's a great book. It's much shorter than the one we're reading. But after reading that, it's just like, oh, they've also just brainwashed us to the extent that we have to have somebody tell us what we can and can't do.
100%.
Every single one of us, basically. We're always just looking for somebody with authority, somebody above us, an expert, something to allow us to do something. So when they tell us you are not allowed to be open, everybody's mind just go, well, they said that we can't. So we can't. What are we going to do? And then if we do what they don't tell us, then there's going to be consequences for me. And I can't have that. I have so much nice things at my house. Why wouldn't I just go and be entertained until they allow me to come back? And, I wasn't. If they tried to do it again, I would be extremely against it. Extremely against it. And I wasn't really a part of a church at the time. And even if I was down in Texas, it was a much bigger church that I had no influence in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Not that I run this church at all, but like I'm great friends with the pastor. I know everybody. There's like 100 people there. So
yep.
Not saying that I could do anything about it, but at least I could be like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And try to convince them to not shut the doors, even in the face of the government being like, you have to. And I think I gotta find that sentence I sent you. You actually texted it to me.
I got it. It's page 12. I think it wasn't 12.
Page 11.
It was 11. It wasn't the first. It was the first sentence I underlined, but then I went back and I underlined more because I'm like, well, if I'm going to underline it, I might as well underline some more.
Do you got it?
Oh, yep.
Do you want to read it quick?
Sure. It's talking about the friction between the Christian church and the Roman government. But the sentence that you're discussing says conversion to Christianity could not be tolerated because it replaced loyalty to Caesar with obedience to Christ, replacing the empire of the Romans with the kingdom of heaven.
I think that says a lot. Just even okay, so I'm coming to realize that a lot of Christians, especially like around my area and growing up, it was just more of a cultural thing. And I know that I've said that before and it really angered people, but I think it's true.
Sure.
There's so many people around here, they're just like, well, my grandpa went to this church, or my grandpa helped build this church, and then my parents went here and I went here growing up as a kid. So now when they need somebody to carry around the tithing plate, I'm there every Sunday of February.
Right.
And no matter what's going on, I'm always there, even if I don't care about the church outside of the month of February, and it's like they
Right.
don't have any relationship with God. They have nothing except for the cultural aspect of it.
Hmm.
And because
Hmm.
I live in the Midwest, that's how I grew up and saw people. And like my dad was a pastor, and I got, not trying to talk down about my dad at all, but like direction from growing up in the church, I never had a direction to connect with God really. It was just like, oh hey, here's the
Sure.
traditional things that we do, and besides that, it's kind of where we're at. So I guess my point of even bringing that up is when it came to like 9/11 or war and stuff like that, it seemed like people are very more patriotic than they are Christian, and they serve
Sure.
the American empire way more than the kingdom of heaven, and they care more about not saying anything against the empire than they do against God.
Sure.
And so again, pointing that dumbing us down, it really they really brainwashed us since kids to obey them and to have a direct connection with them. And God comes second
Mm.
in this
Yeah.
country a lot, I would say, from
Mm.
my personal experiences. And I'm sorry if that upsets people, but that's just what it is. I don't even know how you argue against that, really.
Sure. Yeah. It's
And
it's
I
possible someone's observed something else, but that doesn't mean your observations aren't correct.
my church
Right.
now is not like that whatsoever.
Sure.
So
100.
I
Sure. For sure.
so I'm experiencing something entirely different now than I did growing
Hmm.
up. Um, and I know there's a lot of really great people who love God now. I'm not saying that there's Christianity doesn't exist at all.
Right.
I'm
Right.
just saying it doesn't exist to the extent that we need to, that it needs to,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people serve the American empire way more than they do the kingdom of heaven.
I hadn't looked at it from that specific angle, those exact words, but as you say that, I'm realizing in a lot of this book, you could replace Rome or Romans with the United States, and it would still be. I mean, that's kind of the tenor of some of the notes I made, but I hadn't thought of it in those exact terms. Like you can just take out. You could say conversion to Christianity could not be tolerated because it replaced loyalty to the government with obedience to Christ, replacing the United States with the kingdom of heaven. Almost. You could almost say that.
Mm-hmm. And we're not going through what the Romans did, you know.
Sure. Yeah, different times for sure.
Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of correlations between the two, I would say.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that sentence? On that one
Mostly,
specific sentence?
yeah, mostly just the applicability to today. Like you're saying, the church does often confuse obedience to authority with following Christ.
I'm sorry. There might be a couple of times where I just take a second to figure out what I'm doing here. 'Cause-
Well, I'm
um,
I'm entirely expecting you to edit out all my rabbit trails, so that's fine.
no,
That
I'm
was
not
not
gonna.
relevant.
No, none of that. Just the dead silence where I'm looking through my notes to try to figure something out. And
Right.
like I said, it almost there was one time where I wrote like this paragraph, and then I kept reading, and I was like, oh no, this is awesome forever. And all I put was this paragraph too, question mark. Actually, it's good forever. It's like, well, I can't just sit
Right.
here and read 3 pages, but I might have one. Okay, I'll just start reading, even though I don't exactly know what it says at the moment. But in the middle of the third century, the Roman Empire was about 280 years old, having changed from a republic to an empire as it emerged from civil war in the decades before the birth of Christ. In fact, it was not too much older than the US is now. The economy of the empire is empire was in a serious recession as a result of uncontrollable inflation and multiple wars in the region we now call the Middle East. Currency was devalued, yet the emperors increasingly had to spend money they didn't have on bureaucracy and on the military and its infrastructure. I can break for a second because that is exactly what's happening right now. Our currency means absolutely nothing, and it's going even farther downhill.
Dude, this is so funny because when I read it, I read completely different things. I skipped over that entire, I mean, I read it, but in my mind, I skipped over this entire paragraph that you're reading. But I know exactly where you're going with it. And like, as you continue reading, all of it, as the sentence says, all this sounds familiar to us in the 21st century. It's like the same thing in a lot of ways. But I completely read right over it.
It goes on. Unemployment and underemployment were increasing exponentially as large landholders took over the small farms. That's weird. That's not happening at all. And forced the landless into the cities. The average family size decreased as children came to be seen more as a liability than an asset. Nomadic people, the barbarians, were crossing the borders and coming into the empire. And as a way of escape from the brutality of everyday life, the brutality of real violence and death was offered as a spectator sport. So, we're not killing people for sport, but I mean, football, UFC, stuff like that, just being distracted by sports. And I wouldn't call the people crossing the border barbarians, but that is a real issue that causes our money to devalue even more because of government programs and stuff like that. And I just don't think it's sustainable. The average family size is decreasing because it's like we're not going to be able to go in order whatsoever, and all the chapters are going to cross, which is completely fine. But
well, and in fairness, we're covering the intro, which touches on all the chapters. Right now, we're talking about, so we are going to brush on top of everything.
But later on, it does talk about people not procreating in the empire because they were like, why take on their responsibility when I have so many things that just entertain me and bring me happiness, I guess, like a very high time preference of, oh, hey, I can have fun now. Why would I even look at the future? Why would I even bother myself with these kids? And then when money is devaluing, it makes it even harder to imagine being able to take care of other people. And when you're struggling taking care of yourself, a lot of people just look for the immediate gratification of something making them happy instead of thinking about the future, because we know it's going to be tough. Even if nothing else bad happens and inflation just continues to come up, it's going to be harder to live, because everything's getting more and more expensive. I don't think anybody's raises are keeping up with inflation, and where were we? My wife and I went out to eat, and she talked about, like, even the food portions were less and it was way more expensive and it wasn't as good. And then I tried to explain to her how that actually happens because of inflation. She's like, no, I get that's why it's more expensive, but like the food wasn't as good and it was smaller. I was like, no, that's also because inflation. Because they can't just keep raising the prices and raising the prices without cutting back on the food. They have to kind of, try to find a happy medium of doing both.
Right.
And then the harder it gets for them to stay open, the less they're going to care. So the quality of the food's also going to go down. And our society is having less and less kids. And I think that will continue to do so. I think there's things that have happened that are causing complications for people to have kids. And then also people are just destroying the anatomy of little kids, which is going to cause complications for them when they're older. And then like I was saying, the inflation and everything, it just makes it scarier and harder to be able to be like, oh yeah, I'll be able to take care of children. Like, you can't even take care of yourself. You know what I mean? So it's like hard to
Yeah.
imagine starting a family for a lot of people, especially with, I mean, how many people live with their parents,
Yeah.
you know, that are
And
our age?
the cultural incentives, or the, well, I guess cultural incentive, the incentive, the statement that a system tends to produce the results that it incentivizes, and the culture incentivizes does not incentivize a man to commit to a woman.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because you could get married and for whatever reason, good or bad, you get divorced, and now she could she could choose to divorce you, and now you're, generally speaking, providing for two households. So the incentives, and there's a fellow who says this a lot, and he says it in a way that I think is designed to poke some bears. But he says, why would a man choose to get married in this culture? And he's not making the statement that men shouldn't, but he
Yeah,
is saying,
sure.
look, they are incentivized to not. So that's going to lead to, you know, fewer children also,
Yep.
generally speaking.
Yep. And in the chapter talking about marriage, it talks about how before it was completely just a business transaction, you know, for the, sorry, I gotta kind of move here. A business transaction or a business deal, whatever, between the man and the woman or a family, it was actually more expensive to keep their daughter than to marry her off. And so
Oh,
they
right.
didn't value marriage whatsoever. And it was actually Christians in the empire that made it meaningful. And it just blew the mind of
Hmm.
the even like Aristotle and stuff. Like what do you mean you actually care what your wife thinks? You know, why aren't you just banging all the slaves in your house? You know, what do you mean she
Right.
gets to say? How is she not? Because they just looked at everything as property,
Right. Right.
even their
Yeah, it must have
legal
ruled to
system.
be a man back then.
I,
I mean,
I've
I
just,
say that tongue in cheek for sure, but it's like, it's a certain, there may have been some interesting things about it, but yeah, it's pretty different from
mhm.
today.
Yeah, and I mean they own their kids were property
Right.
to the full extent, even in legal terms, and they could murder their kids for no
Hmm.
reason. They didn't have to have a reason to murder them. Nobody would even blink an eye if you killed a child, which
Yeah.
just blows my mind. I guess look at the abortion rates now, but at least, I mean, at least they're
There's
not
a
like,
detachment nowadays.
yeah, and at least it wasn't like 6-year-old kids where you're like, oh, you embarrassed me, so now I'm gonna slit your throat. You know, I don't.
Right.
But that just blew my mind. But I'll let you talk for a minute. I'm kind of going all over the place here.
Oh, okay. So one thing that I thought was interesting from the intro was, and I think from what I've read so far, this kind of is the kind of underpins the whole everything that I've read so far. Not necessarily the whole book, but at least what I've read so far. And it stuck out to me because of how applicable it is to today. Um, it said a revolution of the individual affirmed that all people are created equal in the image of God and no one is expendable. As I think about it, that's not exactly the quote I was looking for, but that's the concept, because it's saying it's it's discussing the concept that, specifically the statement, no one is expendable. It's easy for us to write off other people as, we see it a lot nowadays from different camps calling different people not humans, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes literally, or not people, or whatever, or just different terms that attempt to dehumanize a person or a group that you don't care for. And even in your mind, pick the most evil, wicked, disgusting, reprobate, bad person out there. even that person, as deserving as they are of punishment, even that person is still a human. They're still a person. They're still created in the image of God. And the fact that you trying to separate them from the image of God is hurting yourself, and it's not hurting them, and it's doing nothing for them.
Mm-hmm.
I often see it used as a justification for often by people who claim to be Christians, as a justification for ungodly statements or positions. It's I really struggle with it, because I find it disgusting when someone does that. But I've
Mm-hmm.
done it.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
it can be easy to do.
from the right, looking at like trans people, it would be easy for them to do it. And then from the
Yeah.
left, right now, I guess it would be easy for them to do that to people who live in Israel,
Right.
or to do it to every person who lives in, like, any Palestinian,
Sure.
whether they were the small amount of people who attacked them or not. You know, not that I was alive during Vietnam, but they really dehumanized the Vietnamese too. I mean, it's really ramped
Right.
up when they're trying to lead to war.
Mm-hmm.
Also, but the way that my pastor has put stuff like that is like, even if you don't like what they're doing, basically like what you said, it's they're just God's kids and he wants them back. So then if we're like, well, being trans is wrong, so now I just hate you. It's like, no, that's not how we're supposed to
Mm.
be. Like, God wants them back. And how do you square that? you know,
Hmm.
for some for
Sure.
some people. For some people, for all of us, depending on who the other person was, it would be hard to do that. But like, isn't that what we're supposed to at least try to do? And that doesn't mean accept what they're doing, but
Right.
love them and try to get them to understand what they're doing is wrong.
Hmm.
And
Sure. For sure.
that's just not easy, really, for anybody, I guess. But that's kind of what we should be doing. We're actually going to run out of time here.